He came out of the snow without a sound. No collar, no owner, just purpose. In a quiet mountain town, a mysterious German shepherd appears on a desolate road and leads Officer Julia Tran into the forest. What she finds is more than a missing child. It is a truth buried in frost and silence, a bond that defies training, and a choice that changes lives. This is not just a rescue story. This is about healing, purpose, and the quiet ones who guide us home when we are lost. Stay with us now and let the story of Bramble begin. The wind that morning was razor-thin, slipping between the pine trunks like a whisper that had lost its voice. Officer Julia Tran tightened her grip on the steering wheel of her patrol truck as it climbed the frost-slicked road toward Ridgeline Hollow. Snow fell in thin spirals, gentle but constant, blanketing the Vermont forest with an eerie silence. Highland Grove, a quiet town nestled against the White Mountains, rarely made the news. But in the last 48 hours, that silence had shifted. A child was missing. 9-year-old Eli Turner had vanished after a cabin trip with his mother. A routine hike. One moment they were taking photos near a trail bend, the next an avalanche tore through the ridge like a beast unleashed. His mother survived. He did not come back. Julia had taken the call because no one else could. Not after what happened last winter. Not after she had found that other boy too late. Since then she worked alone. She trusted her boots, her flashlight, her silence. But that morning's silence had other plans. Near the 6th-mile marker, her headlights caught movement. A figure emerged from the woods, slowly, almost respectfully, like it did not want to startle the trees. At first she thought it was a coyote, lean, covered in ice. But it moved differently, purposefully. It walked onto the road and stopped. Not in the center, just far enough to be seen. She eased to a stop. It was a dog. A German shepherd, medium-build, matted fur the color of burnt cedar. Its eyes amber and unnervingly still locked with hers. No growl. No tail wag. It did not approach. Did not run. Just stood there, breathing slow clouds into the frozen air. Julia opened her door cautiously. "Hey," she called, stepping down. "You lost?" The dog did not respond. Just turned, took a few slow steps toward the woods, then stopped. Looked back. She frowned. "What are you?" Then it did it again. Walked, paused, looked back. Julia had seen this kind of behavior before in search dogs trained for partner response. But this dog had no vest, no tags, no handler, just presence. She keyed her radio. "Unit 14 Tran, I have got a loose shepherd acting intentional. Near mile 6 East Ridge. I am going in on foot. Will report back." She grabbed her gloves, zipped up her thermal jacket, and followed. The dog, still silent, led her off the road through a narrow cut in the pines. Snow clung to her boots. The wind picked up. But the dog never looked afraid. It limped slightly on the right hind leg, but did not slow down. After 20 minutes of hiking, they reached a clearing. A fallen log. A faint imprint in the snow, and something half buried beside it. A child's glove. Bright red, threaded with cartoon stars. Julia froze. The dog sat. Not a bark, not a whine, just stillness, as if it were waiting for her to understand. She reached down, brushing snow from the glove with her bare fingers. It was small, cold, fresh. Her voice barely broke the air. "Eli." The dog stood again and took 3 more steps to the edge of the clearing, then looked back. And for the first time in almost a year, Julia did not hesitate. She followed. And the wind somehow shifted behind her, less like a warning, now more like a breath being held. She did not know his name yet. Did not know where he came from. But something inside her whispered. He was not lost. He was leading. The forest grew deeper with every step they took. Pines closed in above them, heavy with snow, bending like old guardians watching from above. Julia moved quietly, her boots sinking into the powder, muffling her presence. The shepherd walked ahead, just far enough to lead, never more than 10 steps away. His pace was steady, though the limp on his right leg grew more visible with each mile. He never looked back in fear, only in assurance, as if to say, "Keep coming, we are close." They passed the remains of a broken fence half buried beneath the drifts. Beyond it lay an old path, barely visible but present, a thin memory of human passage under years of snow and silence. That is when Julia saw it. A small red scarf caught on a bramble thorn dancing lightly in the breeze. She stepped forward, pulled it free, and recognized the pattern. A space print with tiny stars. It matched the missing report. She closed her eyes for a moment, then turned to the dog. "You knew him, did you?" she said quietly, not expecting an answer but unable not to ask. The shepherd stood motionless, ears tilted forward, eyes locked onto hers. Then slowly he sat down in the snow, his breath fogging in soft puffs. It was not obedience. It was presence. Julia stepped closer, crouched beside him. Her voice softened. "What is your name?" The dog gave no sound, but his eyes flickered for a second. There was something old in them, something human. Julia reached out, gently resting her gloved hand just inches from his muzzle. He leaned forward, pressing his nose to her palm for the briefest moment before pulling back again. A quiet acknowledgement, not affection, but trust. "Okay," she whispered, "I am calling you Bramble." The name felt right, solid and quiet, like the dog himself. He blinked slowly as if to agree. They continued forward together, deeper into the wilderness. Time seemed to pause. No birds. No wind. Just the rhythmic crunch of snow underfoot and the sound of their breathing. Then, without warning, Bramble stopped. His ears twitched toward the right. Julia followed his gaze and saw it too. A narrow trail led down into a shallow ravine hidden from the main ridge. Snow had covered most of it, but not all. Something dark poked through the white. A boot print. Small. She knelt, examined it, then stood again. "He is close," she murmured. Bramble started moving again, his limp more pronounced now, but his pace unwavering. Julia followed the prints, followed him, followed the feeling rising in her chest that something was about to break open. After another 15 minutes, they reached it. A wooden shack leaned against a slope roof, partially collapsed, one shutter hanging loose. No smoke, no footprints at the entrance. But Bramble walked straight to the door, sat down, and stared. Julia raised her radio. "Highland Dispatch, this is Tran. I am at an abandoned shelter, possible location of missing minor. No contact yet, but evidence suggests recent activity. I am with the dog. Repeat, I am not alone. He brought me here." She lowered the radio, looked at Bramble, who remained frozen at the door like a sentinel. She felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not hope, but something more raw. A memory of what it meant to believe. Then together, without a word, they stepped forward through the snow toward the door, and whatever lay waiting in the quiet. The door creaked under her hand as Julia pushed it open slowly, the wood swollen from years of snow and silence. Inside, the air was cold and sharp, tinged with damp wood, and something else, old cloth maybe, or the faint copper scent of dried blood. Light from the snow outside spilled across the floor, revealing dust-frozen footprints, and a figure curled in the far corner beneath a heap of blankets and torn canvas. Julia stepped in carefully, heart pounding, her gloved hand already reaching for her flashlight. Bramble stayed at the threshold, unmoving, eyes fixed on the shape in the dark. Julia crouched beside the bundle, gently brushed away a corner of the fabric, and saw a face, pale lips, cracked cheeks, hollow. Eli Turner. Alive, but barely. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Pulse weak but present. His body was trembling, not from fear but from cold. Julia pulled off her outer jacket, wrapped it around the boy, then reached for her radio. "Highland Dispatch, this is Tran. I have located the missing child. He is alive, but hypothermic. Request immediate medical evac at my coordinates." Bramble found him. I repeat, the dog led me here. She glanced back at the doorway, but Bramble was gone. Her breath caught. Then she heard it. A low growl outside, muffled and sharp like a warning. Julia moved to the entrance, scanning the snowy clearing. There Bramble stood just beyond the tree-line, body tense, ears flat, eyes locked on something in the distance. Julia followed his gaze. At the edge of the forest, a dark shape moved between the trees. Not animal, not deer. Human. A man, large, heavy coat, face hidden beneath a hood. He was not walking with urgency. He was circling slowly, watching. Julia's instincts flared. She stepped outside, one hand near her sidearm, voice calm but firm. "Vermont State Police, show yourself." No answer. The figure paused, then turned and disappeared into the woods without a word. Bramble remained still, tail low but alert. Julia moved to his side, hand resting gently on his back. What was that? She whispered to no one in particular. She checked the snow around the shelter. No vehicle tracks, no signs of a camp. Whoever that was, he had come on foot, or had already been here. Back inside, Eli stirred faintly, a whisper escaping his lips that barely carried. He was not alone. Julia froze. "Who, Ely?" she asked, kneeling beside him. The boy opened his eyes just enough to speak again, barely audible. "A man in a blue coat, he told me not to move. Then he left." Julia's jaw tightened. She wrapped another thermal blanket around the boy, then stepped back outside. Bramble had already moved to the slope, his nose pressed against the wind. Whoever that man was, he had left no trail. But the forest had a way of remembering. Julia keyed her radio again. "We may have an unknown male in the area, possible threat last seen near the shelter heading north through the tree line. I am requesting backup and drone surveillance immediately. The child confirms he was not alone." She turned back toward Bramble, who now stood on the ridge staring into the trees, as if waiting for her to understand what came next. Snow began to fall again, soft and slow like ash. And the silence that followed was not peace, it was warning. They were not done yet. The rescue helicopter would not arrive for another 40 minutes. Julia knew that was too long to sit still in a place where something or someone had already circled them. The storm was beginning to build again, wind clawing at the treetops, pressing ice into every seam of her coat. She crouched beside Eli, who was now wrapped in 2 layers of thermal blankets, his face pale but eyes fluttering open more often. He murmured one word again and again, "Bramble." The dog stood at the threshold, his body angled toward the trees, tail stiff, not in fear but in readiness. He looked back at Julia once, then back into the woods. She felt it too, a pull in the air, like something waiting to return unfinished. Bramble gave a single huff, then stepped away from the shelter, following a line through the snow no one else could see. Julia called after him, "Bramble, wait," but he did not. He moved like he knew where he was going and why. Julia hesitated, torn between the boy and the dog, but Ely gripped her hand weakly, his voice just above a whisper. "Let him go. He is not finished." She stared at the trees, the falling snow, the trail that was already fading. Then she turned back and sealed the shelter tight, covering the cracks with old canvas, nailing a broken board across the doorway. The wind would howl, but they would hold. Eli needed warmth and protection now. She lit a small fire using the emergency pack and rationed the heat packs she carried on every solo patrol. Every 5 minutes she checked the ridge, every 10 she listened for Bramble, but only the wind replied. At last headlights appeared in the distance, bouncing through the tree line, then voices, the sound of boots and snow, the rush of organized movement. Julia waved them down, flares in hand, and pointed toward the shelter. The medics moved quickly, lifting Eli with practiced hands, loading him onto the snow. Sled then strapping him beneath a blanket warmed by chemical pads. He whispered again, "Bramble, where is Bramble?" Julia did not have the answer. The commanding officer, a stocky man named Lucas Grant, approached her with a frown visible beneath his frosted beard. "You found the boy?" he asked, disbelief and relief mixing in his tone. Julia nodded. "He was in the shelter. The dog found him. Bramble. Shepherd, no tags. He led me straight here." Lucas looked around, scanning the trees. "Where is he now?" Julia followed his gaze. "Gone." That night back at the base, Julia refused to leave until she filed every report by hand. She documented the dog, his behavior, his path, the details of the unknown man in the forest. But no one had seen footprints except hers and Bramble's. The snow had covered the rest. "You sure you are not imagining him?" Lucas asked the next day, standing in the break room, coffee steaming between his gloves. "I am sure," Julia said quietly. "Then where is he?" She had no answer. For the next 3 days she drove the ridge line before and after her shifts, stopping by the clearing, leaving food and a blanket, calling softly into the forest. No sound, no movement. Only wind and pines and a silence that felt heavier than before. Bramble was gone. Not lost. Gone. And Julia felt it, like a thread had been pulled from something inside her, unraveling what little certainty she had left. She had saved the boy, but lost the one who had led her there. And somewhere beneath the snow, the truth waited, breathing, waiting to be found again. 3 days later, the snow began to melt. Not much, just enough for old paths to reveal themselves under thin ice, for branches to bend a little less, for voices to carry farther. Julia returned to the ridge, not as an officer, but as someone searching for what she could not explain. The boy had stabilized, he was recovering well, his mother had flown and wrapped him in tears and silence and gratitude. But Julia had not stopped thinking about Bramble. She walked the trail alone this time, retracing every step to the clearing, then deeper into the woods where the dog had last looked before vanishing. She moved slowly, scanning the snow for signs, anything. A print, a torn leaf, a thread of fur. Nothing. until she reached the edge of a dried ravine where the trees thinned and the wind shifted. There beside a pine tree half buried in frost she found it. A collar, green nylon stiff with its clasp broken, one side scratched with faint markings. She crouched, brushing off the snow, and held it up to the light. The name was barely legible, but there it was etched with something sharp. Bramble. She stared at the collar, heart thudding. This was not an accident. She brought it back to base, presented it to Lucas without saying a word. He looked at it, then at her. "Do you know what this means?" She nodded. "He has been out there longer than we thought." Lucas frowned, moved to his desk, rummaged through an old file box, then pulled out a folder with the town's search and rescue symbol. He opened it, flipped through yellowing papers until he stopped at a photo. A younger boy in a red coat beside a shepherd, nearly identical to Bramble. This was taken 5 years ago. Winter training for avalanche response. The boy is Tyler Baines. He died in a rescue mission during a storm up north. The dog went missing in the aftermath. They never found him. Julia looked at the photo, looked at the eyes of the dog. "It is him." Lucas shook his head slowly. "We thought he was gone, lost in the storm. But maybe he was not lost. Maybe he just kept searching." Julia traced the worn edges of the collar. "He led me like he had done it before." Later that evening, she visited Eli at the clinic. The boy was sitting up, drawing quietly with a pencil and a cup of apple juice beside his bed. Julia sat at the edge of the chair beside him and smiled. "Do you remember much from the shelter?" He nodded a little, then paused. "I remember him. He stayed with me the whole night," he said softly. "When I cried, he pressed against me, and when I was cold, he laid across my feet." "Did he leave you alone at any point?" "Only when you came close," he answered quietly. "He heard you coming. He knew." Julia felt something settle inside her, something she had not felt in a long time. Not pride, not relief, but clarity. Bramble had not been acting on instinct. He had remembered. And maybe, just maybe, he had chosen. That night she returned to the clearing one last time, stood beneath the tall pines and held the collar in her hands. The wind brushed past her coat, slow and low, like a breath not yet exhaled. She closed her eyes and whispered into the dark, "Thank you." She did not expect a reply. But far off through the trees, where the snow was untouched and the forest unbroken, there was a faint sound. The soft shuffle of paws in fresh snow. She turned. Nothing there. But her heart lifted. Because sometimes the ones who guide us never truly leave. They just wait for the next soul to need them. 2 weeks passed and the snow gave way to thin ice and soft earth. The forest began to breathe again, releasing its secrets in slow, quiet exhale. Children returned to school, trails reopened, and Highland Grove exhaled as if the worst had passed. But Julia Tran knew the story was not over. Not until she found him again. It was a Tuesday morning when she got the call. A ranger named Paul had spotted a dog near Echo Ridge along the old fire line. Said it was limping but moving fast, like it had somewhere to be. Julia left within minutes, her uniform half sipped, her coffee untouched on the porch. She drove straight to the ridge, heart steady, mind sharp. Something inside her had already known she would come here. The forest was thick with wet branches and the scent of thaw. Birds had returned, the sky was wide open, but her eyes stayed on the ground. Tracks not old. Shepherd sized, pressed deep into the soil and heading north. She followed on foot through narrow slopes, across a stream, over a collapsed log. After nearly an hour, she heard it, a bark, not sharp, not panicked. Low, steady, like a signal. Then she saw him. Bramble stood at the edge of a small clearing, body tense, eyes bright but tired. He looked thinner, his coat muddy, but his tail moved once slowly when he saw her. Julia froze for a second, taking him in. Then she stepped forward slowly, no sudden moves. "You came back," she said softly. Bramble blinked once, then turned, walking back toward a thicket. She followed close behind, and within moments she understood. A hiker lay at the base of a tree, unconscious, one leg twisted, his backpack flung to the side. Bramble circled him once, then looked at Julia as if to say, "You see now." She dropped to her knees, checked the man's pulse, shallow but steady, then looked up at the dog. "You found him." The rescue team arrived 20 minutes later, and the man, a local biology teacher named Martin Ruiz, was airlifted to the hospital. He had slipped while photographing birds and fallen off a ridge, breaking his leg and losing consciousness. The doctors said another few hours and hypothermia would have claimed him. That evening, Julia sat with Bramble beside the old ranger cabin, feeding him slowly from a travel bowl. He ate without urgency, like a soldier who had returned from duty not for reward but to rest. "You choose them, don't you?" she whispered, "not out of training, not because anyone told you to. You just know." Bramble rested his head on her boot, eyes half closed. He was not asking for anything, only offering presence. Later that week, Julia filed an official request with the department. Status review: canine found in the field, not feral, not hostile, demonstrates advanced search behavior and emotional response. Requesting non-standard classification for community therapeutic deployment. Lucas read the report twice, looked up at her with a raised brow. "You are keeping him." She shook her head. "I am not keeping him. He is choosing to stay." The form was approved quietly without debate. There was no protocol for a dog like Bramble, and no one wanted to argue with the officer who had found 2 missing persons in one season without backup and without error. The next day, Julia walked Bramble through the edge of town. Children pointed, called to him, mothers waved. At the corner near the bakery, a little boy approached holding a half-eaten biscuit. Bramble sat on command, tail sweeping the sidewalk as the boy reached out, gently touching his ears. Julia watched in silence, heart swelling not with pride but with something deeper. He was not just a rescuer. He was a reminder that sometimes the ones who find us are the ones who have already been lost. And sometimes their return is not about going home. It is about choosing to stay. Spring arrived slowly in Highland Grove, as if afraid to disturb what winter had left behind. The trails began to open, the trees budded with quiet promise, and people stepped outside again, blinking into the light. But something had changed, not just in the forest, but in the town itself. They were talking more, listening more, and always at the center of those stories was a name spoken softly: Bramble. Julia sat on the porch of the community center, watching him in the field beyond. Children were playing on the new mats, the ones that had been donated after the rescue fundraiser. Bramble moved among them, not with the energy of a puppy, but with the calm assurance of someone who understood what presence meant. He did not bark, did not chase, only sat beside those who needed stillness. A girl in a pink wheelchair reached out to him, and he turned his head, placing it gently on her lap. Her fingers stroked his ears, slowly, her breathing steadier with each pass. Nearby, a boy with a stutter read aloud while Bramble lay beside him, eyes closed, not asleep but listening. Julia stood at the edge of it all, clipboard in hand, but her eyes were on him. There had been offers from other towns, from training programs, from departments who wanted to take Bramble into their systems, but each time she declined. "He is not meant for protocol," she had told them. "He is meant for people." And they finally stopped asking. One afternoon, a woman arrived at the center, her face unfamiliar but her eyes full of recognition. She carried a box of old photographs and a letter. Julia met her at the steps. "You found him," she said, not as a question but as truth. Julia nodded quietly. The woman opened the box slowly, revealing photos of a younger Bramble beside a teenage boy smiling, wide backpacks slung over one shoulder. "He was my son," the woman said, "Tyler Baines. He trained Bramble himself. They were inseparable until the day Tyler did not come back." Julia looked down at the dog who now sat beside her, as if sensing the weight in the air. "I never knew what happened to him after the storm," the woman continued. "We searched for weeks. Then we were told he was presumed dead. But something in me never let go. I believed Bramble had survived, that he was out there helping someone." "You were right," Julia said gently. The woman knelt in front of Bramble, who did not move. She reached out, hands shaking, and touched his chest where the green collar sat firm and quiet. "You came back," she whispered. Bramble leaned into her hand, eyes soft but alert. He did not need to remember her. He simply knew. That evening, the town gathered in the gymnasium, not for a dance or a holiday, but to open something new. A quiet corner of the community center now filled with soft rugs, books, blankets, and windows that looked out onto the trail. Above the door was a carved wooden sign. The Bramble Room. Inside, children sat in circles, some with grief too deep for words, some with stories no one had asked them to tell until now. And in the center of it all, Bramble rested his head on the floor, eyes open, ears turned toward each voice that broke the silence. Julia watched from the doorway, hand over her badge, heart full in a way it had not been in years. He had returned. Not just to a place, but to purpose. And through him, so had they. The sun rose gently over Highland Grove, casting long golden shadows through the windows of the Bramble Room. The floor was quiet now, except for the soft rustle of a blanket and the breath of children still waking from a midday rest. Bramble lay at the center, his body stretched out, eyes half closed as if caught between dreams and duty. His ears flicked once, then settled again. He was not asleep. He was listening. Julia entered with slow steps, holding a fresh bowl of water and a folded note tucked in her pocket. She set the bowl down beside him, then crouched, running a hand through the thick fur behind his neck. "You did good," she said softly. "You kept your promise." Outside the window, a small group of students waited near the trail, their teacher reading from a storybook while they sat cross-legged in the grass. It was part of a new program, reading to Bramble. Even the most reluctant voices found courage in the steadiness of his presence. Later that afternoon, a ceremony was held on the south lawn. Not a formal one. No speeches or microphones. Just families and children and volunteers gathered beneath the tall oak tree that stood at the highest point in town. A bench had been placed there, simple, smooth, engraved with a single line: "For those who lead us back when we are lost." Bramble sat beside it, calm and still, while Julia stood with the mayor, a young boy named Ellie, beside her, holding a wooden box. Inside was a medal, not for service or rank, but for memory. A token to acknowledge not just what had been done, but what had been given. When the mayor handed it to Julia, she did not place it on Bramble's collar. She held it in her palm, then set it gently on the bench beside him. "You do not need this," she said quietly. "But we do." That evening, Julia wrote in her logbook for the last time under the heading "Unofficial Entry." He never once failed to show up when it mattered. Not because he was trained, because he chose to. And I have come to believe that purpose is not given. It is chosen. Weeks passed, then months. Bramble aged, but not outwardly. His movements grew slower, his naps longer, but the depth in his eyes never changed. He continued his work without needing to be asked. Sitting beside those who grieved, lying next to children who could not yet speak, guiding veterans with trembling hands into rooms they had avoided for years. One autumn day, as the leaves turned copper and the mountain air cooled, Julia stood with Bramble at the edge of the woods where they had first met. The snow had not yet fallen, but the scent of it was in the air. She looked down at him and smiled. "Do you remember?" she asked. He looked up, eyes calm, tail brushing the ground once. They did not need words. That winter, a new wing was added to the community center. It included a therapy garden, an indoor track, a quiet room for those overwhelmed by noise. And above its door was a second plaque. "Here lives a boy, a dog, and a second chance." And below it a promise etched into wood. He never asked to be found. He only chose to lead. On a quiet morning, as snow drifted lightly outside and the town moved at its own slow rhythm, Bramble lay curled in his usual spot beside the window. A child leaned against him, reading aloud, not for credit, not for practice, but for peace. Julia watched from the doorway, hand over her heart. Not every miracle is loud. Some arrive on silent paws with tired eyes and steady hearts. And they do not leave. They stay. Because they have chosen you. Thank you for staying with us through the end of this heartfelt journey. If Bramble's story moved you, if you believe in second chances, in loyalty without words, and in the quiet power of love, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and let us know how this story touched you. Until next time, stay kind, stay present, and remember, sometimes the quietest souls are the ones who change everything.